it's Rob again. It's time for another 5-minute member talk, and I am super excited about today's guest speaker. He is one of a pair or tag team, if you will. His name is Ryan Ballard, and he is a member of Undertaking the podcast. And here's their, if you know who they are, that's what we're looking at today. Hi, Ryan. How you doing?
What's going on, buddy? I dig that, at least what I've been told, the coffee tastes a little bit sweeter coming out of that cup. I don't know. I've been told you don't have to put Splenda sugar in it or anything, but I don't know if it's folklore, but that's what I was told.
Well, let's give it a try and see how it works. I'll be sipping through it through our interview today.
It'll be magnificent. I'm happy for you. It's good to see you sporting the cup. Proud of you.
Certainly hotter. It seems to hold the heat better than the other ones. That was warm.
Well, yeah, that's the controversy in the coffee, buddy. That's it's hot sometimes. What's going on? Tell me about it.
Well, so Ryan Ballard, this is great. We love having you guys on here. As I said, Ryan is a member of the Undertaking the podcast, which is roughly a weekly podcast that drops.
Yeah, we do here lately because of NFDA, the National Convention, where we got a chance to interact with you a little bit there as well, besides being in your home state of Washington, which we thoroughly enjoyed. Our episodes drop right now on Fridays, regular episodes. If we get to a point, for instance, when we go to conventions, we have an abundance of just episodes. We talk to a bunch of people and we try to record anything and everything we can. We try to put those out Tuesday mornings at 6, and then our regular episodes are Friday mornings at 6. So I think we've got maybe 1 or 2 episodes left from NFDA that'll be put out. So I think we've only got about maybe 2 or 3 more Tuesdays where you'll have that episode. But, I mean, we've got some other conventions coming up. We've had some people reach out to us, so we'll be traveling in June, it looks like, to another convention. I'm still trying to tie down some loose ends there before we say anything. But, yeah, we're going to be moving around a lot. And basically what happens is we sit down, we talk to a bunch of people, and we want to make sure we get that stuff out as quickly as we can to where it's still relevant for the time frame. You know what I mean? So those Tuesday drops are usually from conventions.
So for those of us that haven't listened to the podcast, I was actually found you guys just on happenstance. I think you had 1, maybe 2 episodes put out there, the first one just being a teaser of what was coming up. But I know in the very beginning you kind of talked about you and your partner, Brian Waters, who will be on later with us, I'm hoping.
He will.
Yeah, but you guys met at a casket. Is that right? You met at a casket distributor, or what was that?
What happened? The story. I mean, we went down to York, Pennsylvania, for just kind of a trip to a casket company. Looked at some of the woods that they made here in America and whatever else, and we got to bantering back and forth. This was actually before I was an actual director. It was before mortuary school that I had the opportunity to do this and go with Brian to this casket company or a casket factory. And we got to see, the nitty gritty aspect of what it takes to put these caskets together. Overall, what we did notice when we were there, a lot of that stuff was done by American hands, which is very important to me and very important to Brian and most of us, I would think, American jobs, American hands, it's important. But anyway, Brian and I kind of developed a little bit of a rapport. We went out, did some networking, as I like to call it, and just kind of got to know each other that way a little bit. And then once I got into mortuary school, actually after mortuary school, Brian had reached out, wanted to know my thoughts on maybe doing some embalming with him and vice versa. So we started doing that. And kind of, honestly, it was great because I got to learn from somebody that has more experience. So, I mean, I'm always up for that. But we started to do that. I'd say we probably embalmed 10 or 15, people that had passed. And he gave me pointers. I gave him a little bit. I didn't necessarily have too much to give. Fresh out of school, but I wanted to learn, wanted to soak it up. So we eventually, I believe it was the summer of maybe 2017, I was out in my garage. I'm a cigar guy, cigar, scotch. I'm a fan of all the spirits, we'll say. I was out there. My kids were out riding their bike or whatever else. I was doing something in the garage. I've got a TV in my garage where I can watch podcasts or at least have something within the ambient sound or the air that I can listen to while I'm doing something. Happened to have Joe Rogan on, which Joe, I'd love to be on your podcast. If you ever want funeral directors take the podcast, I'd love to be there, man. That'd be awesome. But I was listening to him, and he talked about the idea of if you're doing something unique, something that people either don't know about or don't understand or whatever else. He made the point of saying, why aren't you talking about it? Why don't you develop a podcast? He goes, he talked about his podcast and how it just originated with some guys, comedians, just sitting down and really just recording their conversations. Didn't have to be any, no narrative or whatever. I mean, no script, nothing like that. They just sat down and talked and recorded it. Well, it becomes more and more interesting with, different guests and things like that. So I kind of took that and took it back to Brian and said, hey, man, I heard something, kind of wanted to see what your thoughts were. I don't know much about podcasting. I'm just now getting into it. Is there such a thing as a legitimate funeral-based podcast or mortuary podcast? He didn't know. We didn't know. We researched it a little bit. Maybe there was a little bit of a niche for, I guess, our type of podcast. And then we took off. Now, I will say this. Had we known what we were getting into initially, I don't know. I mean, because Brian works his tail off, man. There's no question about it. Had we known producing, editing, things like that comes into play here, I don't know if we would have jumped, feet first in. But we're here now. This is what we're dealing with, and it's exciting. It's enjoyable. I think, now that we've really expanded kind of what we talk about, it's not just necessarily embalming and funeral related. We want to get people's stories of their loved ones. Let's pay tribute. Let's, and this cliche word of celebrating the life of somebody, let's celebrate them when it comes to the idea of their story. And this is a way for some people can tell their story, their loved one, what they went through, the process, how they felt about it. There's no axes to grind. We just feel that people need to talk. Death is something that people do not talk about enough. I don't feel that they necessarily embrace it. Full circle, it's going to happen, to everyone. As a medic, I've seen more so than some, and it's going to happen, and I think this career has changed my mindset a lot too, realizing that we don't have that much time here, in all honesty. So, so we started, I went off on a tangent there. I'm sorry, Rob, but we kind of went in the direction of, hey, let's just jump in and see what's going to happen and see where it goes. It took off. We had sponsors that jumped on board immediately. I mean, you guys jumped on board, and we appreciate it, and supporting us and our mission. And like I said, there's no axes to grind. We just want to talk funeral service with the professionals. We want to talk about, to the families about their stories and their loved ones' stories, and how can we encompass all that into just a podcast that can help everybody grow. So that's the goal. I call Brian Waters, windy waters, but I think that was a little windy on my end. I apologize.
Well, I think that's what they call going down the rabbit hole, which coincidentally enough is on the backside of the mug too. So we're good with it.
That coffee tastes great, doesn't it? It's unreal what it does. You put it in a certain cup, and it just makes it that much better. I'm proud of it.
So I guess I missed it. Did you guys know each other before you went to Pennsylvania, or did you go together?
We knew of each other.
Okay.
I wouldn't say competing agencies. I mean, I don't know that we look at that anymore from a standpoint of anything. We weren't really competing agencies. He's on I would say the northeast part of the county. I'm on the southwest part of the county. It's not really competition at all. So I didn't really know him before York, got to know him at York. Like I said, we networked, had a good time. felt like maybe this is somebody that, is my speed when it comes to my thought process and motivation and just things like that. And it just kind of worked out. I saw him at, when was an FDA in Indiana? It's been a few years ago. I was
Yeah,
in
it was the year before last, I believe.
and I had the opportunity to see him there, talk to him, and this is just kind of how it transpired. A lot of it, I would say, transpired our friendship, and then this, the business aspect of this is just transpired more so off of interaction and passing. Like there, hey, what's up, Brian Waters? How are you? Yada yada, blah blah blah. And then it slowly but surely has turned into what it is now, where we talk to each other probably 3 or 4 different times a day, either complaining about what we're dealing with at our funeral homes, our bosses. Sometimes there's always challenges with families, and then we do a lot, podcasting from a standpoint of talking back and forth on different ideas that we have, different people that we're looking to bring in. The one that was released this morning, I know this is going to probably be down the line here, but it's an excellent story when it comes to, death, tragedy, but also forgiveness. So, we're venturing out into different things. But yeah, we have to talk about these episodes, I would say, 2 weeks in advance, just to try to make sure we're on the same page of question lining and narrative and things like that. So,
oh yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. Well, what a great story, because it kind of ties into what we'll talk about, is the networking and being a part of the associations, that sort of thing. But here's 2 people from the same county in Indiana that decide they want to expand their knowledge base. They want to grow. They want to continue their education. And so they go off to York Casket, meet, and now you're working together with this podcast that is going worldwide. I mean, you guys have listeners around the world at this point.
We've got a pretty substantial downloading base. We've got people in Europe, I believe. Kenya. We were able to be a part of that with Dominic Astorino when it came to the Kenya embalming project. So we get a lot of listenership out of Kenya now, which is surprising. I don't know why that's. Maybe it is. I don't know why it's surprising to me. I guess because some of the issues they have when it comes to. I would say, just technology. We had to change some things around, sending an embalming machine to Kenya, because the outlets are different. There's different types of they have or they don't have there that we have here. So I was kind of surprised that we do have such a large listenership there. People in Europe, we've got, Australia. So a lot of different. I would say a lot of different cultures, different people that are listening. And, we're just happy that people appreciate it and find value in it. That's the goal. For funeral directors, even the consumer, the whole point of this as well is for the consumer to have a bird's eye view or whatnot into what a funeral director does, because I feel like maybe it's not as open as what it should be. So, the consumer gets to listen to our conversations and be a part of that. We get a lot of people that reach out to us that are consumers, asking us questions about what does this mean? When you talked about this topic, you said this, what does this mean? So that's important. I think it's important for funeral service, but I think it's also important for the directors, for all of us to know that, yeah, we're in different spots within the United States, throughout the world, but we all have the same problems. Talking about them, being open about them, I think that helps, not only working through them, but it opens up the dialogue for people to be just a little bit more free flow when it comes to thinking and thinking outside the box,
Well, and you guys have done some great episodes with different suppliers that, I know that we out here in Washington in the West probably don't use so much or even have access to. It is still very much I don't want to say centralized, but it's very much your territory is kind of where you operate. So although we're all working to do the same thing of serving families, we all have different ways of doing it. We have different suppliers. So question for you, though, that kind of came to my mind was, That day you were planning this trip, that day you were packing, that day you were getting ready to leave, did you ever have the thought that went through your mind that this day today is going to change the rest of my life, how I'm doing things? Because really, that's kind of what's happened. Is beforehand, you
Yeah.
never really had this opportunity, or I would have guessed this idea to do it. But again, now you guys are worldwide.
Yeah, I don't think anybody expected it to take off the way it has. I didn't expect this. I mean, I didn't even know what a podcast was until maybe four or 5 years ago, let alone figuring out how to start, your own, and a lot of that's Brian. Brian is very much a driver when it comes to this podcast. I wouldn't say that, I wouldn't say it's changed our life by any means. I mean, it's not like not Jeff Bezos here by any means. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it has changed my dialogue, and it's changed my outlook. Looking at different things, talking to different people about different ways they do things when it comes to, in-home services, when it comes to green burial, when it comes, for instance, green burial, we talked to Harlan Forrest out there in Washington State.
Yep.
That man, and what was his name? I can't remember his name. Walt Patrick.
Walt Patrick, right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Walt, if you're listening and watching, I apologize. Walt Patrick. Absolutely. It was a joy to talk to him. He's got a different way of doing it, but he has no axe to grind, and very informative and revered in the way they go about it. That's something in Indiana you don't see much of. And it's an interesting way to protect a forest as well, to protect your existing natural resources, So talking to people like that, we've had the chance to talk to Monica Torres, and she's an interesting podcast, interesting just person in general, very informative. She travels around, talks a lot to the public about embalming, something that, I think is, key. I get a lot of questions about that too, So, she's doing some good things. The Thomas Lynch episodes, Brian was like a giddy schoolgirl within it, knocking stuff over. But basically, I mean, it was unbelievable. He was fanboying him. But, I mean, if that's somebody that you look up to like that, why wouldn't you? And if you listen to the podcast, how deep that man gets, how he explains things within funeral service, unbelievable. I would say a scholar within funeral service, how he explains things and how he makes you think outside your own way was phenomenal. You don't hear much of me talking back and forth in that podcast because, you let the guy go. When you got a guest on, let the guy go. And if he's on a roll, he's on a roll. And he, Dominic Astorino, another one that when it comes to restorative art, really, really great podcast. We disagreed a little bit here and there in that podcast, but that's kind of my MO. I'm going to do that. Larry Stewart Jr., another great one. And this is the thing, Rob, and this is what I want you guys to kind of understand is the podcast has changed. I wouldn't say changed my life, but it has opened up dialogue with people that I would have never had dialogue with if it wasn't for this. Do you see what I'm saying? Larry Stewart Jr., I would never have talked to him or seen him probably had I not gone to NFDA, had I not been a part of this podcast, had I not had a reason. I think this is providing value not only to the consumer and the funeral director, but it provides value to me because it makes me think outside the box, man, and being open to all avenues in funeral service. Principle of the matter is I wouldn't have known anything about, I'm not sure what they call it out there right now, whether it's human reduction or human composting, but
organic reduction.
Organic reduction. There we go. And that's the reason I have you on here. But I wouldn't have known anything about that had we not sat with you and you explained the process. And in that time when that podcast came out, you were still learning the process too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Still am.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's things going on everywhere. You know, we talked about the Jedi Disposal Act, and I don't remember if that was Missouri, where that was going on. But there's so many different facets within funeral service. Everybody's doing things different. Had we not done this, I wouldn't have met you, would not have been out to the great state of Washington, which we absolutely love, by the way. Leavenworth, for those of you, that are watching this from the state of Washington, that convention was a blast. I had an absolute blast. The Stein took a lot of my money, but it is what it is. We had a great time, man. I wish I could have been there when it was snowing, to be honest with you. I've seen some of the pictures since Christmas time, and it looked beautiful. But I think from a convention standpoint, I had a great time. But yeah, sorry, I went down a different rabbit hole. But yes, this has changed the dialogue for funeral service, this podcast, and I hope people realize that, and I hope people are just open to it. Like I said, we're not grinding any axes. We just want to talk, something that I think just in general we've gotten away from as humans.
Yeah.
So yeah, there.
So
sorry, I got a little deep there.
That's all right. The good news is, if you did miss last year in Leavenworth, we're going to do it again this year, 2020. DEFCON 2020 will be back in Leavenworth. It's going to be August 18th through 20th. So, hey, Ryan, if you're looking for something to do, I know you don't like plane travel too much.
Yeah, I'm not a plane guy.
Pictures. But
yeah, I got pretty nauseated on that flight. I wouldn't say apprehensive. I don't know. I'm being close with a lot of different people you don't know what's going to happen, all the turbulence. I mean, it's just not an enjoyable experience for me whatsoever. Brian loved to document the entire thing, but it is what it is, man. I'm a motion sickness guy. I know when it comes to I never had any problems in the back of an ambulance, but boats as well as planes, they get me going a little bit. I'm a little bit more on edge. My eyes are peeled a little bit tighter, and I'm pretty sick to my stomach. So it is what it is,
That's all right. We got you out here, and we really enjoyed having both of you. It was great to meet with you. Tell me, though, we kind of alluded to it before. You guys are from Indiana, just kind of in between Indianapolis, Fort Wayne. Is that right?
Yeah, we're actually, I would say, a little bit northeast of Indianapolis, probably about 50 miles. So it's about an hour trip from my house to downtown Indianapolis.
Okay.
Probably be an hour and 20 minutes. So,
okay.
Because he's on the farther portion of the county. Being
your first time to Washington, and you've been somewhat tied up with Indiana as far as being in funeral service. I've been a paramedic, and I don't know complete history, but I know a little bit. You've been with funeral service for a few years now. What are some differences that maybe you saw in talking with the folks at the conference in Washington that are different than what you're seeing back in your state?
Well, in Indiana, we talked to a lot of people when we were out there with you. Got a lot of information about things, and honestly, the cremation rate obviously is different there versus here. People within this area of the U.S. They are very much in tune with having the deceased present, casket open, in most cases, and that's not necessarily uncomfortable for them. Talking to some of the people out in Washington State, it's a different thought process, different mindset out there, which is fine. Each his own. I'm not busting chops by any means. That is a difference, though. Our cremation rate is high. When it comes to we're not at 80, 85. I can't remember what your cremation rate was.
We're about depending on where you're at, we could be between 80 and 85%.
80 and 85.
Where you're at in the state, yeah.
We're teetering right about halfway, 45, 50%. In some areas it can be 60. It just varies on the culture sometimes in that area. And then also the demographic. So let's see. I would say some other differences. Obviously the topography is different. We're awful flat. Where you guys are, I think you have probably some different challenges when it would come to, transferring someone into your care up in the mountains or where we were at for Leavenworth. I mean, we were in a town, but it was in a town in between two mountains, man, in the middle of nowhere. I'm not busting chops, but you guys have your own set of challenges there as well. I don't know that from a standpoint of service related or anything like that. I mean, I think that's all pretty much in tune across the board, across the U.S. I mean, everybody does things differently. I just think that, the cremation rate obviously is different there. We've talked about that, Rob, in some of the speeches we've given. We gave a talk to the donor network here in Indianapolis a while back and talked about some of the differences within the state of Washington and here, what you guys are experiencing and things like that. I'd say maybe your relationship with your donor network, I can't remember who that was. It was Cameron Axelson. FirstNet?
LifeNet Health.
LifeNet.
Yeah.
I think maybe your relationship with them may be a little different than ours in Indiana, and it sounds to me like they're across like 4 different states. I mean, they just don't service the state of Washington. From my understanding, you've got a base in Montana and things like that, and they service Montana, Idaho, Washington State, Oregon, and then something else. I could be wrong there, but they service a wide variety of states. Right. Indiana Donor Network serves Indiana. You know what I mean? So there's probably some challenges there. I wouldn't say anything negative. Maybe it's a challenge of some communication or whatnot, but we don't have to work with anybody outside our state for donation. That's nice. That is definitely a difference that you guys have versus what we have. But honestly, I would just say maybe just some service-related items are just a little bit different. Because honestly, the same conversations we have here at home, we had with you guys out there, and nothing was abnormal. It's just you have a different way of going about it. You've got a state legislature that has a different way of going about it, which is fine. It doesn't matter. But for me, what interested me was the idea of how you guys are doing things differently, like the human composting, or say it again for me.
Natural organic reduction.
That is the term, folks. Okay, natural organic reduction, but not something that has gotten here yet, and I don't know if it will very soon. We have, our state legislature is pretty tight on things, and I've got my own feelings about that being within the political entity that I'm in. I think they're pretty tight and they could loosen up a little bit. But you guys are doing some things different, and that for me, that was important to learn about that, because you have people here. Rob, here's the thing: you've got this clickbait that comes up on Facebook talking about natural or organic human reduction, and talking about that, but then it doesn't go deeper into it, and it's got to we talked about this when we were speaking out there, but the picture is a wheelbarrow with dirt in it, and then you've got a shovel. Well, what is that? You're in somebody's garden. What does that portray? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, people take that and they run with it. It was important for us to sit down and talk with you to at least understand that, it's not someone just going out in your backyard and dealing with it that way. There's regulation that comes into play here. State has jumped in and definitely puts forth some regulation rules, some things to follow, a protocol put in place to follow to do this. So that was important for us, because we were getting a lot of questions. What am I supposed to say? Here in Indiana, we don't do that. I mean, we don't even do alkaline hydrolysis, for goodness sakes, and those things are made here in Indiana. So there's some things I roll my eyes at. I'll say that. But I want to be able to answer those questions when people ask.
Well, and that kind of goes in line with what we as an association, and really what all funeral associations and funeral directors, funeral homes should be doing. It's our responsibility to educate the public. If we don't do that, the media will,
Yeah.
Hollywood will. And that's where you're going to get, like you said, the wheelbarrow, the shovel, the pickup truck full of dirt that is supposed to be grandma or whatever you want to say. But we need to really be focused and do that.
The narrative can get out of hand so quickly, Rob.
Oh yeah.
You know, just with the clickbait, just with the narrative, the narrative the news pushes for funeral service is never, seems like it's never positive. It's always something about, you know, something that is either against the law that has happened or that is just outrageous or whatever else. They never take the good. You know, honestly, first time in a while, and this is Indiana news. I don't know if this has come your guys' way though. First time I've seen the news here locally really highlight something good, a personalization of of a service. They do veteran services a lot. You'll hear that, unclaimed veterans. They very much highlight that, and I think that's great. But they highlighted John Andretti's last lap around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I'm an IndyCar guy, Graham Rahal, rah-rah, you know, yada, yada. That's my guy. Alexander Rossi, my guy as well. The Andretti name has always been big in IndyCar. I thought it, and I'm not sure who the firm was that did it, but I thought it was absolutely right, respected, revered. It was the right thing to do. And it honestly, I want to talk about personalization. It doesn't get much more personal than that. You know, his name actually on the pole there within the Speedway. R.I.P. John Andretti. You know, I just, things like that, I thought that the news did take that and very much highlighted that in a positive way. You don't get that much in funeral service, you know?
Yeah, you're right. A lot of times we do get nothing but negative, and we did see that. In fact, I added that to our Facebook page as well. And that's kind of, like I say, and going with the education of the public, is we need to really spotlight that. That was sort of the background behind these talks, these 5-minute member talks, of what is your firm doing? What are you doing as a funeral director in your community to put that positive spin or that positive light on who you are and your community and your firm. And that's, again, goes back to that education. I find that for me, a lot of that can be done or should be done through the association level. What's your relationship? I know you guys got a great association out there. I've talked with your executive director, Andy, a few times, Andy Clayton. He seems to be, he's on top of it. He's got it down pretty good and is really making Indiana, putting it on the map, if you will, as far as for funeral associations. How is that working out there?
Honestly, you know, Indiana's a great spot, man. We had a convention last year that was unbelievable, well attended, huge, just unreal. Very much enjoyed it. Andy Clayton, our executive director, was obviously a major stake in that, or had a major stake in that. You know, he is doing some things differently. That's awesome. You know, for us, our state association came out and supported us almost immediately when this came out. And that was important because it provided us with some opportunities to sit down and talk with some people that maybe we wouldn't have gotten. You know, you get that credibility behind you, or I guess that valued credibility of the association behind you. You know, it does help. It does help when sitting down with people. They feel a little bit more comfortable. You know, for us, the state association, you know, I truly believe that, you know, I've said this, we don't talk enough anyway as directors. Our association, if we didn't have the association, I don't know that I necessarily would know what's going on legislatively. The association is important for us because we had some legislation that was going to be coming down, dealing with some insurance assignments and things like that, that we didn't necessarily know about. Our lobbyist approached Andy Clayton and said, "Hey, what do you think about this? Yada yada." And you know, from there, our association jumped in and tried to steer our legislators down the right path here to where funeral directors aren't the ones that are going to get screwed. You know what I mean? I hate to be that way, but that are not going to get put in a situation where reimbursement or anything else can be an issue. It's already tough as it is when it comes to reimbursement. This law was going to make it even worse. So our association jumped in, was able to relay our concerns as funeral directors to our state legislature, and they went down a different route. But had our association not been there, had we not been paying our dues, had we not been actively involved, had we not had a lobbyist that knew that this was going to affect funeral service, it all could have gone, just under the wire a little bit. We wouldn't have known about it, and that's important. The other thing that's important too, as well, to be able to run things by the association. If you've got a chain of custody issue, if you've got who has the right of disposition, some of these families are so nuclear now, or multi-nuclear, whatever the name for that is it's always changing who has the right of disposition. And it's just because of divorce sometimes, partners in life, things like that, it changes. You want to be accurate about that. You want to make sure that you're following the rule of the law. That way it doesn't come back to bite you in the behind there, hero. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where I think that the association helps us with that. I can call and I can look in my Indiana book of facts and do what I need to do there. But it's awful nice to be able to call somebody and say, this is what I've got. What do I do here?
Yeah.
For them to have an answer or be able to get you an answer is important, because usually it's while you're sitting with a family. So, state association for us, Brian and I preach this, it's important because they do have the specifics as to what's going on in your state. Every state's different, Rob. We saw that firsthand coming up to visit you. Every state's different. It's important to be in on the know when it comes to this stuff, especially when, you get some state legislators that might be trying to skirt some things by. That happens. I'm fully aware of that. That happens a lot. So it's good to have lobbyists and executive directors that are involved.
Well, yeah, and we when I saw you out here in Leavenworth, we kind of talked a little bit about it. I don't know if you recall, but Washington State has really gone through a huge overhaul with the association. We've gone from basically being a trust company to back to what we originated as back in 1902, as being a member benefit association. We are here for our membership. And so that's why we're really focused on doing things like getting the legislation out there, let people know what's coming up. We've got some bills that are being passed around right now, one of which is interesting. It talks about professional licensing. Doesn't necessarily say funeral director licensing, but professional licensing. And essentially it's talking about if you can't afford to go to school and get your license and get your education that's required, you can take a proficiency test and get your license that way, which may or may not be the best way to do it. I don't know. I don't have the proper answer to that, but I know my own personal opinion. But there's just some things out there. And like you said, if you don't pay attention to them, if you don't watch where it's coming from, things get passed into law that you have no idea about. And so that's kind of been our primary focus this last year through this overhaul, is to change how we talk with and how we communicate with our membership and how we communicate across the world. One of which is adding these talks, getting the ideas out there and getting people talking about it. Just like you said, starting the conversation to see where it goes. Who knows what'll ever come out of it? Maybe nothing. Maybe we'll change the world. I have no idea. But you got to start the conversation.
And the thing about that, Rob, too, is if you weren't involved with that process, I've noticed this when it comes to legislators, at least state legislators. Sometimes we want to make law just to make law, just to pad our resume and pad the results for the next campaign. I don't know that that's necessarily the right way of going about things. Nothing to do, there's nothing to do. Go out and shake some hands, kiss some babies, yada, yada, go from there. I feel like sometimes we rush things through before we really know what's happening. Our legislators do that. That's why associations are important, because they don't understand funeral service. They don't understand maybe the damage they're going to do with a certain law. Here in Indiana, that was going to be a big deal for us. That was going to hinder a lot of reimbursements when it comes to life insurance policies. And, our association would be able to jump on board and really steer them in the right direction here, or at least come to a common mutual agreement or compromise. But, I've noticed, legislators, if we as a public, we as associations don't try to interact and educate them, there'd be laws every year, 20 or 30 different ones that are coming down the pipe to where, who knows what would happen, but it probably wouldn't make anything easier on you. You know what I mean? There's a time and a place for it, but I think there's also overreach that comes into play as well. And from a county level, as being an elected official within my county, I assure you that our state does definitely have their hand in the county's pocket constantly. So I will leave it at that. But important to be there, because yes, I do think that sometimes maybe over legislating isn't the right way of going about it. So.
Well, and there's so much more, it's not just the legislation, the networking as well. I know you and I have talked about it in the past where, you may not know the guy in the next town over, but you may need to use them at some point. Yep. or provide some help to them, or have them provide some help to you. The networking of the association through the districts, through the state conventions, through all of that is just tremendous, because I can tell you, before really getting into this role the way I am now, I didn't know all the funeral directors. I didn't know who I could call on in certain towns, but now I have that ability being a part of the association. And that's really the goal out there, is to, look, we're all in this together. We're all here. You ask anybody in this profession, we're all here together. We're all here to serve families. Ask anybody. That's the number one answer, to serve families. Ask them what the second answer of doing it is, and most people can't come up with one. It's to serve families, because that's what's most important, is to serve the families. Now, we may do it differently than the guy next door, but ultimately our goal is that. And so the networking of learning from other people is just tremendous. And so I know you've talked about it with the Indiana Association there. That networking component is really been open to you. It basically, in a nutshell, started your podcast.
Well, and to be honest with you, networking is so cliche. People use this all the time when it comes to anything, and people kind of roll their eyes. But it really has put us to where we are now. So, when it comes to, I don't know if it's a new thing or not, but I think there's more networking going on now when it comes to funeral service than there ever has been. And I think that's because people do promote the idea that it's okay to call somebody and ask a question. It's okay to reach out and say, I don't know. Can you help me? That's something maybe earlier on before funeral service and when I was in funerals, before me and when I got into funeral service, you didn't hear, for instance, my father, who was my boss, you didn't hear about him interacting with a lot of funeral directors besides his brother that he worked with, or his father that he worked with. Right. It just wasn't a common thing. Now, and I'm not going to say because of Brian and I, but maybe because of Brian and I, he's actually venturing out, talking to other people from other firms. We can't look at each other all as competition all the time. I think that's a dangerous perspective to look at it. What are these people doing differently, and how can we be better with them. We within business, there can be animosity, and sometimes I think some of that's petty, and I can reach out to a lot of different people within my area and then not think, oh, he's fishing for information. No, I'm just going to run something by you, see what your thoughts are. Will you think this would work? There's nothing wrong with that. And I think just in general as a society, we've gotten away from that. We want to immediately consider somebody an enemy if they're asking a question about something you're doing different. Well, they're not an enemy. Maybe they want to know. Who cares if they want to be an enemy? Whatever. I don't care. But they're still creating the dialogue, wanting to know what you're doing different and doing better. So I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was just thinking when you were talking about that, you really want to see that action take effect. Walk into somebody's funeral home and ask them for their general price list, which, as you know, is totally legal and able to be done. But just walk into the guy next door and ask for their price list. You might, it'll be an interesting conversation for
it'll
sure.
It'll be a different conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But here that's not a big deal. I mean, we follow the rules as they're set by our legislators and go from there.
Well, Ryan Ballard, thank you for coming on with us. I've had a great time talking with you. Looking forward to hooking up with your tag team partner, Brian, at some point in the future. But it's been just a privilege. How can we get in touch with you in the future if we want to reach you?
Undertaking the podcast. You can look it up on all social media sites. It's on there. Info at Undertaking. I believe it's undertakingpc@gmail.com.
Okay.
Let's see what else. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Honestly, really, besides email, I would say our social media outlets are the best way to get a hold of us, especially Facebook. Instagram is something big that we've really gotten a lot of traction on too. So you can email myself, ballardryanb@yahoo.com as well. You can get me. I believe I don't have Brian's email up in front of me. That's horrible. Give me just a second. Sorry.
Yeah, we can throw it up there. I know what it is. So
just attach it to it because I think I might actually. I didn't get our actual podcast email wrong, but you can reach out to us definitely on all social media sites. You can get a hold of us there. LinkedIn, we're on there now doing some things. So, and then I don't know if our phone numbers are on the website. I doubt it. That was kind of a thing I didn't necessarily want to have on there, but
well, that's all right. We'll just put email.
Fairly easy to get a hold of. I mean, as soon as you get on the website versus or on social media, you'll find all of it. So, and hey, just from my perspective, I just want to say to you, thank you for taking a chance on us. That was our first time presenting, our first time doing anything. Brian and I were, I would say, exceptionally nervous. I call it Astorino nerves. I a little nauseated before we got up and talked, and you had a very large crowd there. I was surprised at how large it was. There were some nerves there, but you gave us an opportunity, you gave us a chance, and I hope we came through for you. We had a great time. I'm not gonna lie about that. We had an absolute blast. Hopefully one day come back out again and indulge a good time, visit the Stein again. It was just honestly, it was a quaint little town, good spot to have it. The hotel was great. I just don't have any complaints about Washington State Convention. It was great.
Well, we loved having you. We were excited that you guys were able to make it. I know it was kind of right at the very beginning of the birth of the podcast. And so we were just happy to have you out here. I've heard from people all over the state that were excited to meet with you, some that talked with you, and they said how much fun it was. So thank you for coming out, and check out Undertaking the podcast. If you like, I will say this, that's kind of been the inspiration for what we're doing now with these 5-minute member talks. Although we're going to probably change yours to more of the 45-minute.
Old Windy Ballard. They can't say Windy Waters anymore. Man alive.
That's okay, because we don't want to limit it. If we're hopefully educating, we're hopefully sharing some fun and good information, and why limit that? So it may be 5-minute member talk, it may be 45, but we're happy to have you.
Well, hey, check out we're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the podcast platforms. You can find Undertaking the podcast. I believe we're on 103 or 104 episodes. I think 104 was today. So yeah, we're staying busy and loving every minute of it. So thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Bet. Thank you. And you want to end us with your normal
the almighty rock and roll, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Hey, listen, if you've enjoyed this, if you want to be a part of it, if you want to have a conversation, call us, subscribe, email, get in touch with us any way you can. Until next time, everybody, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.